Right, I've got a grumble. My grumble is that I don't believe that everybody who did that survey, not us, obviously, because you were all being honest, but I don't believe everybody who did that survey was being honest. Do you? Only 34% of people grumbling about the weather. Everybody knows that it's a national pastime, isn't it? To grumble about the weather. When was the last time you can remember grumbling? Have a think for a moment. I wonder when it was. What's the thing you moan about the most? Is it the weather? I don't know. I wonder if a little bit later anybody's willing to own up to any of that. Today, we are continuing this journey that we've been on with the Israelites through Exodus. Our reading tells us of an incident at a place where they'd camped, and it's called Revd. We're told that they had no water to drink. So there was a real problem. Let's not belittle that. No water, going thirsty, it's a problem. But how did the Israelites react? Well, verse 2 of chapter 17 of Exodus says this. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And then in verse 3, they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" Their instant reaction was to pick a fight with the obvious person to hold responsible, their leader, Moses. They went in for the blame game. It was, after all Moses' fault, wasn't it? It just had to be. That was where they started. But they didn't finish there. Verse 7 tells us that they asked this question: "Is the Lord among us or not?" You see, Moses wasn't their only target. They questioned God. They questioned his presence. They questioned his reality. They doubted him and they questioned him. As Moses said, they put God to the test. Now, I suppose we can have sympathy with the Israelites' plight. Lack of water means thirst. But if we study the bigger picture of Exodus, I think a pattern emerges. You see, when Pharaoh had them pinned up against the Red Sea, what was their reaction? Well, in Exodus chapter 14, verses 11 and 12, this is what we read. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." How did they react? Yes, they grumbled. And when they realized that the desert was not a place they were going to find food easily, no McDonald's to hand back then, what did they say? Well, in Exodus chapter 16, verses 2 to 3, we read this. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat round pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. How did they react? Yes, you've got it. They grumbled. And then when Moses went up the mountain to meet with God, and he was gone a long time, what did they do? Chapter 32, verse 1 says this: When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered round Aaron and said, Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him. How did they react? They grumbled. Do you see the pattern? Whenever anything wasn't going right, whenever it wasn't happening in just the way that they wanted, their immediate response was to grumble. Clear pattern of behaviour here. When the going got tough, well, it wasn't that the tough got going. When the going got tough, their instant reaction was to mutter and moan, to grumble and blame. It was always Moses' fault. And sometimes Aaron was included in that. Or it was God's fault. Or it was everybody's fault. Did they suffer from amnesia or a bad case of selective memory? At the Red Sea, they forgot the awesome power God had used to obtain them their freedom. In the desert, they forgot the miraculous way God had taken them through the waters on dry land and then saved them from Pharaoh's army. At Rephidim, they'd forgotten how God had provided manna and quail to eat when they were hungry. So they're a moany old lot, aren't they? They don't seem to think about what God has done for them. They want an easy life. Question though, are we any different? Is the book of Exodus not a mirror we can hold up to look at ourselves? The Israelites all too often showed a complete lack of trust in God. Trust in God. That's the first lesson we should learn here. There will be hardships. There will be problems. There will be difficult times. That's life. What will you do in those times? Will you blame God? Will you grumble about your lot in life? Or will you turn to God? Seek his help. Trust in him for a way forward through the problems and hardships. At Rephidim, there was a sharp contrast between how the Israelites grumbled when they faced this problem of having no water and how Moses reacted. Verse 4. Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They're almost ready to stone me." The people blamed God, but Moses cried out to God. Seeking God should be our first port of call. Pray. Be honest. Yes, Moses was. What am I to do with these people? They're almost ready to stone me. It's a cry from the heart from him. But never forget that God is with you. He promised to Moses that he would be with him. He promised that he would lead the people through the desert to the promised land. Jesus promised that he would be with us forever. Those who were his people, his followers, his disciples, you and me. At Rephidim, with no water, as in every other case, God had the answer. Verses 5 and 6. The Lord answered Moses, "Go out in front of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. Unlike the people, Moses trusted God. Now, God told him to do something that I suppose might have felt awkward, difficult, unusual, risky. God told him to strike the rock with his staff and water would come. But here's the really important part of this, I think. Moses was to do that in public with witnesses. Can you imagine what might have been going through his head? Or it would have been going through mine. What if I do this and nothing happens? I am really going to look not only stupid, but there is going to be an uprising against me. God said there would be water, but Moses still had to trust him and to take the risk and step out in faith in public. Moses could only do that because his relationship with God was rock solid. That relationship with God had been forged through encounter, think the burning bush, through experience, what Moses had seen God do, through trust and through dialogue, through prayer and through presence. Is that how you foster your relationship with God? Is your relationship with God like that? Or are you like the Israelites and your only reference to God is when you're in difficulty, and then it's about blaming him for your misfortune? One final thing strikes me as I've reflected on this Exodus story, this part of the story, and how the Israelites grumbled. And it's this: God was incredibly patient with them. Why? Because despite everything, despite what they were like, despite the fact that they were this grumbling, moany old lot, God loved them. They were his people. When they moaned, they had no water. He didn't say that because they were grumbling, he wouldn't help them. He wouldn't have anything to do with them and their plight. He provided water. Moses, despite being at his wit's end on a number of occasions, continued to lead them. He continued to intercede for them with God. God loves you. Do you really know that? When problems arise, don't be like the Israelites who felt self-sorry, who wanted an easy life. When problems arise, turn to God first. Remember what God has done for you in the past. Be thankful and trust that God will make a way. Grumbling or gratitude, which path will you take?